US President Donald Trump has just launched the largest trade war in history by imposing a raft of tariffs on the rest of the world. The rest of the world now needs to respond. Will tariffs really make America great again? Is time running out for Iran? America's moving its B-2 bombers and aircraft carriers in the region. Iran now needs to respond. Is time running out for the Muslim rulers as protesters call for the armies to move to end the genocide? Is the US becoming the new USSR as pro-Palestinian activists are disappeared off the streets of America? This is Decoding the Narrative, and we'll be taking a deep dive into all of these. I want to start with a story that's been doing the rounds on social media, but it hasn't really had much coverage on the mainstream media, and it's regarding Disney's remake of the 1937 classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, what's happened is the film's actually flopped, and the reason why it's flopped is many people have boycotted the film. Now, why would anybody boycott this timeless classic? Well, the film stars former IDF soldier Gal Gadot, who played the role of, and I'm not kidding here, the evil witch. Gadot's been an open supporter of Israel, even prior to October 7th. This led to tension with the main actress who plays Snow White, Rachel Zelga. Now, Zelga, who is from Colombian descent, she's been an open supporter of the Palestinian cause. And on release of the film, she shared a clip of the film. And she ended with a post where she said, "And always remember free Palestine." Now, this ruffled quite a few feathers, not least Gal Gadot, who's been campaigning for Israel for the last 18 months. Eventually, both stopped appearing together because they had enough of each other. And this forced the film's producers to fly out to Snow White and try and force her to remove her post. And to her credit, she didn't remove her post. And this has been getting a lot of coverage. Now, many were stunned why the producers visited Snow White, but not Gal Gadot, who's also been campaigning for Israel. And what this really shows you is what's taking place in the Middle East now is affecting many different stratas of life, and it's also gone over to Hollywood as well. In the end, there's nothing Wonder Woman could do to save this film from flopping. So what this episode really shows is narratives affect all walks of life. Okay, so unless you've been living under a rock, you couldn't have missed Donald Trump's imposition of tariffs on the whole world. It's the largest trade war in history. It ushers in probably the end of globalization and a new era now where trade barriers are being erected. So Donald Trump, what's he done? He's imposed a baseline tariff of 10%, but they're much higher rates for countries that have a trade surplus with the US. So that's around 60 countries now who are facing much higher tariffs. So just to give you some numbers, the European Union and the UK probably consider themselves quite lucky. They've only got a tariff rate of 10-20%. China began with a tariff rate of 34%, which has now gone over 100%. Vietnam, who's supposed to be a US ally, has a tariff rate of 46%. South Korea, Japan, both allies of America, have received a tariff rate of 25%. Even Israel wasn't safe from tariffs. It's received a tariff rate of 17%. So the UK considers itself quite lucky. You only got a tariff rate of 10%. So what are tariffs? Why are they having such an impact? Well, tariffs are taxed on imports, and they have three effects. They affect the price of goods when they come into a country. They affect trade with nations. If I have to pay more to bring goods into a country, I'm going to look elsewhere. So due to this, tariffs can affect which industries thrive and which industries don't thrive, and the development of countries. So there is a narrative behind this, and the narrative is the US has a huge trade deficit, around 1.2 trillion. This is the US buying a lot more goods than it actually sells. That's why you've heard Trump say the US is being abused and he needs to put this right.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. But it is not going to happen anymore.
He's also said that due to globalization, the US has been deindustrializing, i.e. US industry has been moving abroad, and this is leading to job losses in America. Manufacturing has been gutted, and that's why we have the term Rust Belt. So what Trump is saying is, I've had enough, and I'm the president who's now standing up and taking action. So how do we make sense of all of this? Was globalization not a good thing for the US? It absolutely was. US companies, US corporations set up plants abroad, set up facilities abroad, and their corporate profits are going up. But only US corporations have benefited. The average American hasn't benefited. In fact, the average American who lives in the Rust Belt, he's seen his and her job move to China, moved to Vietnam. So the average American hasn't benefited from globalization. Coca-Cola's benefited from globalization. Walmart has benefited from globalization. This narrative that globalization was great really doesn't add up, and now Trump is taking actions against this. There are also a number of other things we need to keep in mind when looking at the narrative. The US is a global empire. It's a superpower. This all costs money. The US has a national debt that's out of control. America's national debt is 34 trillion. Its GDP is only 27 trillion. America owes a lot more money than the money it actually makes on an annual basis. And for the first time since the Cold War, we are seeing the rise of a peer competitor. These narratives may not necessarily make it into the mainstream media, but they are determining a lot of America's actions. So what this really tells us, the narratives that we're hearing are not all about economics and national interests. It's also much about geopolitics as well. The imposition of tariffs is a new US approach on how it's going to now deal with the rest of the world. So the days of multilateral organizations, the days of multiple nations coming together and agreeing on trade rules, those days have ended. And now the US will deal with each country on a one-on-one basis. And being the largest economy in the world, that puts America in an advantageous position where it can impose on other countries. And I want to give you an example of this already that we've actually seen. When Trump came into power in January, he imposed tariffs straight away on Canada and Mexico. These are two countries America trades the most with. And what we saw is Trump said to both countries, let's make a deal, and I want to see you guys make some concessions. In the end, Mexico agreed to disconnect from China. Panama agreed to disconnect from China. And Canada is talking about bringing to an end some of its deals it's got with China. So what we're seeing here is a lot of these tariffs and a lot of the negotiations are really about countries disconnecting from China and coming over to America. It's likely the US will pressurize companies to relocate manufacturing from China, so companies like Apple, and relocate back to the US mainland. This likely means the tariffs are the start and not the end of America's attempt to create a new global economy, and one that serves America. So can tariffs revive America's industry? Can tariffs revive America? The US, it needs the industrial plants. It needs processing. All of these moved over to China and other countries. So to do this, you would think you need to invest in these industries. You need to reduce taxes in these countries. What Donald Trump is doing, he's penalizing his own companies. He's penalizing his own allies. And that's his strategy to industrialize America. What can we expect from other nations? Well, many are already talking about negotiating with the US. I don't think China's going to be negotiating with America because the tariffs and reciprocal tariffs are going through the roof. As I mentioned, negotiating with America requires you to be on the same footing as America, which most countries won't be. There is another issue here. Can you really trust America? If this is just the beginning of the world's largest trade war, there are probably other policies that are coming down the line. So is America really a trustworthy partner that you can actually make agreements with? Now, there is a good chance that some nations may come to the conclusion that it's now time to set up your own blocks. It's now time to set up alternative arrangements that don't involve America. So there's a real possibility these actions by Donald Trump may actually lead to the complete opposite of what he's actually trying to achieve. We've also seen this new strategy by America led by Trump. All of it's been done by bullying other nations. It's not about negotiations. It's not about inviting countries to America and talking and getting them to actually agree. What we're finding here is America is literally ripping up the global rules-based order, which America imposed on other countries and which America even invaded other countries over. So as The Economist said this week, Trump's tariff plan may in the end make China great again rather than making America great again. It's time running out for Iran. The US has moved its B-2 bombers and its aircraft carriers to striking distance of Iran. This comes on the back of President Donald Trump writing a letter to the supreme leader in Iran, asking him or ordering him to come to the negotiating table and come to some sort of agreement, which Trump has been very open with. If this agreement is not achieved, then this could lead to military action. Now, Trump came into office talking about reducing America's wars, bringing American troops back and not getting involved in any wider wars. In fact, he's even been talking about shrinking America's footprint around the world.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into.
In the last 18 months, Iran's watched as Hezbollah has been decimated. Iran's watched as Hamas has been annihilated. Iran's watched as the Houthis are constantly bombed. And Iran was forced to look on when the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria was overthrown. Iran's on the retreat. So this begs the question, why would anybody want war with Iran now when Iran's on the retreat? And there's only one answer to this, and that's Israel. Israel is the only one in the region that wants war. And Israel has been pretty consistent with this position. Israel has seen Hezbollah as a problem. It's seen Hamas as a problem. It sees the Houthis as a problem. And the term they use is Iran is the head of the octopus, and that needs to be cut. And it would seem that Israel has won America to a large degree over to this viewpoint. So the narrative we hear is that Iran is a malign actor in the Middle East. It wants its own empire. Therefore, it's a threat to Saudi Arabia. It's a threat to the Gulf nations, and it's a threat to Israel. Also, Iran is constantly accused of being a state sponsor of terrorism. This is the narrative we hear. However, the narrative we don't hear is in the last 2 decades, America and Iran have actually worked together on a number of issues. When America invaded Iraq and it got bogged down in an insurgency, it turned to Iran in order to get out of this. And in fact, it handed Iraq over to Iran. Most of the key groups in the regime are Iranian-backed groups. America therefore had no problem working with Iran in Iraq. In Afghanistan, America has been very open that the north of Afghanistan, which is where the Shia are populated, it's Iran that has been managing this area. It's Iran that's been ensuring there's no insurgency. And in fact, the reason why America wasn't kicked out for 20 years from Afghanistan was because Iran stabilized the north of the country. So as a result, Iran expanded into Afghanistan, it expanded into Iraq, it expanded into Lebanon, it expanded into Syria. And this worried the countries in the region. It worried Israel, it worried Turkey, and it worried Egypt. However, we've seen Iran previously and America, they can come to agreements. They came to a nuclear accord in 2015 where Iran made major concessions. And these concessions included Iran effectively giving up or stalling its nuclear program and allowing Western institutes to come in and inspect at a moment's notice any nuclear site. But this agreement was ripped up in 2016 when Donald Trump came to power because Israel convinced him that this wasn't good for America and it wasn't good for Israel as well. So we've seen throughout recent history, Iran is prepared to negotiate over its nuclear program. So why can't Iran and the US make a new deal now? And the problem here is Iran's nuclear program is a three-way marriage. You have America and Iran who can work together when needed, but then you have the mistress who wants the marriage to fail. And that's the underlying problem, and that's what you don't hear on the mainstream narratives. Israel has been arguing for years that Iran is just weeks or months away from developing a capable nuclear bomb. This is the complete opposite to what we hear from the NSA and the CIA in America. The CIA only recently said that Iran is not even pursuing a nuclear program. So what direction is this all going to go? How is it likely to end? Well, the US and Israel are making maximalist demands of Iran. What they want is a complete capitulation where Iran effectively puts its nuclear program on the line and America will get the international watchdog to constantly go in and monitor this. Really, the ball is now on the side of Iran. Do you capitulate or do you take a stand? Do you potentially test a nuclear device to show that you can't be pushed around? So as this is an ongoing situation, what should we be looking out for? Well, the Israelis are very clear. They want Iran's nuclear sites to be bombed and they want Iran's missile sites and missile capability to be bombed. On the other hand, you see Donald Trump talking about negotiations and the actual terms from the American side, we still have to hear. Now, a lot of these demands, whether they're by Israel or America, it's going to be unlikely Iran will accept them because it will set back Iran's program and it will set back Iran's capability. So we really need to keep an eye on what these demands are and whether the leaders of all these countries are positive towards them or are they negative towards them. So is time running out for Iran? Will America and Israel strike Iran? Well, negotiations are taking place at the moment, and we have to keep an eye on where these actually go. But what is very clear, the only one country that actually wants strikes is Israel, whilst Iran and America are open to talks, although both of them are trying to get different things out of these talks. So this is something we're going to have to watch, and it's something we'll be keeping an eye on at Decoding the Narrative. So the 7th of April marked the 18th month anniversary of the 7th of October and the subsequent massacre and genocide by Israel. And what we're seeing is from Jordan to Algeria, from Bangladesh to Mauritania, are not just protests, but call for the Muslim armies to move and for the rulers to move the armies. Now, this is quite unique. And the reason why it's unique is this call's not really been there or been this clear previously. And it places major pressure on the Muslim rulers. The Jordanian monarchy faces particular pressure as it's been coordinating with Israel over the past 18 months. In fact, Jordan actually took part in striking Iranian missiles when they targeted Israel last year. So the narrative has for long been that although people from across the Muslim world care about Palestine, this is really from a humanitarian perspective, and that's why we see actions like raising charity and making supplication. As far as more actions from these, the narrative is there isn't much. But the message we're getting from the protests now indicate public opinion is potentially shifting. And what we're seeing is clear slogans of armies need to act and armies need to move. And interestingly, just a few weeks ago, Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy, he admitted on a Tucker Carlson podcast that he was really worried about Egypt. And he was really worried about the Jordanian monarchy. And when Tucker Carlson was surprised at this, he asked why these are closest allies. And Witkoff admitted that whilst the rulers are our allies, the people have an affinity with the people of Gaza.
There is huge concern, as I know you know, from a lot of the neighboring countries that the conflict in Gaza, which is of course streamed into everyone's iPhone, a lot of people have been killed in Gaza, a lot of kids, and that's inflaming the populations of some of these countries, again, specifically Egypt and Jordan, to such a point that those governments could fall and cause like massive chaos, including in Europe.
If we have a bad event in Egypt, it could take us back.
So why is this all happening now? It's been 18 months. It's happening now because many around the world can see the Muslim rulers are doing nothing. What we can also see is that the West are clearly with Israel. Despite their condemnations of Israel, you find America, you find Germany, you find the UK, they're still sending arms, regular shipments over to Israel. Despite international institutes calling Israel's action a genocide, these institutes don't have any teeth. They physically can't implement it. The fact that Benjamin Netanyahu flies from Israel over to America, he flies over other countries' airspace, these institutions are giving orders, but they actually have no teeth to physically implement them. The narrative that the rulers support Israel, this has also been completely blown apart now after 18 months. Turkey has continued its trade with Israel. In fact, its trade has gone up, and Israel's oil still goes through Turkish pipelines. Iran, despite its setbacks in the region, has done very little to help the people of Gaza. In fact, when the late Ismail Haniyeh visited Tehran, the Supreme Leader said to him, because you didn't inform us of your attack on October 7th, you're on your own. So what we're seeing is this narrative that the rulers are weak, that the Muslims are weak in the face of Israel. This is really now being challenged. The Muslims have had enough. In fact, many around the world can't believe that the genocide is being televised live and it's actually really taking place in front of them. And what we're seeing now is many people are coming to the conclusion that there is a whole spectrum of actions the Muslim rulers can do to stop the genocide. And in fact, even non-Muslims feel the genocide needs to be stopped no matter what the cost. So things are arming the Palestinians to defend themselves, energy boycotts by countries with Israel, and even the refusal of Israeli ships and Israeli planes to pass over the region. These are now becoming viable options for many people. But these require the rulers to implement them, and it requires the army to actually go and defend Palestinian people. So 18 months since the genocide began, America is not saying their ally, their aircraft carrier in the region is secure. They're worried about the Jordanian monarchy and they're worried about Egypt. And Israel, after 18 months, is not saying that they are safe, secure and stable. They are worried about the ripples that are going through the region. So is this call going to go anywhere? Well, the call is now becoming louder and more unified, and it will be difficult for the rulers and the armies to keep doing what they've been doing for 18 months, which is nothing, and watching the genocide take place. Muhammad Khalil is the first person to have disappeared in America for his pro-Palestinian views. Across America now, men and women who have pro-Palestinian views, they are being picked up and their visas and their statuses are being revoked because they have views which are considered undesirable by the US. Students, academics, professionals, immigrants, and permanent residents could all potentially be in the firing line if they post anything or say anything that's pro-Palestinian. The narrative we're getting is these people are pro-Hamas, they support Hamas, they're anti-Israel, and therefore they're a threat to US foreign policy. There is no place for people like this in the US, and the Secretary of State and the US President have the right, due to their roles, to deport these people. Now, Donald Trump, he ran an election campaign which had a lot of rhetoric about immigration and how immigration needs to be stopped or reduced and how they're messing up the country.
You know, when they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world.
But at the time, everybody thought he's talking about Mexicans. He's talking about people from Latin America. In the context today, anyone with pro-Palestinian views is being targeted. The most interesting thing about this whole saga is all the people arrested for the pro-Palestinian views have not actually committed a crime. In fact, when Muhammad Khalil was arrested, he was returning from a restaurant with his wife, and people gathered around him. He thought he was being mugged. And what happened was they turned out to be immigration officers. And they said to him first, your student visa has been revoked, therefore we're arresting you in order to deport you. And when he informed them he doesn't have a student visa, he actually has a green card, so he's permanent resident, they changed track and they said to him, well, that's being revoked now. So the officers that arrested him, they didn't know why they were arresting him. To this day, no American official has explained what crime Muhammad Khalil committed. Now, many white Americans have also criticized America's foreign policy. They've criticized America's policy of supporting Israel. These people are not being disappeared. Is this not the land of freedom of expression? Well, when it comes to Israel, it seems freedom of expression is being put to the side. And probably the best example I can give you of this is the TikTok ban. Whilst many have said TikTok was banned because of China, because of the data this company that's based in China was gathering could be a threat to American national security, American officials have admitted that the ban of TikTok was due to the coverage it was giving to Gaza, the coverage it was giving to Israel's actions, and that was the driving factor behind the ban of TikTok. So the scenario we have in the land of the free at the moment is that the US is looking more and more like the USSR. The KGB's job was to target individuals who had unfavorable opinions, to target individuals who turned out to be dissidents. This is exactly what America is doing in the 21st century. And not just in this area, you find across the board, America is looking more and more like the USSR. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power to stop the decline, to stop the rot. Donald Trump has come to power to try and stop the decline and stop the rot. Mikhail Gorbachev withdrew the Soviet Union forces from Afghanistan. Donald Trump withdrew America's forces from Afghanistan. The Soviet Union, Moscow had to make a decision. Should it really have an empire? Should it really have the USSR? Or should it put nationalism first? Should it put Russia first? This is the same discussion taking place in America. So really, the US is the new USSR. So this is why Muhammad Khalil and anyone else that has pro-Palestinian views, they are going to be dealt with the way the KGB dealt with dissidents. So there you have it. Please remember to subscribe as it helps us with the algorithm and it also means you won't miss the show. I'm Adnan and this is Decoding the Narrative.